So, when thinking about the theme for today, leading with hope in a changing world, I'll admit I spent far more time thinking about the change aspect of the thing rather than the hope. Now, perhaps that's not the most optimistic way to begin, especially given what we all came here for today, but I think it's important. Because for me, at least, it's our understanding of the changes that we see happening around us every day, which creates that opportunity for hope. And that's what I came here to talk about today. I was once taking an economics course back when I was in college. To be specific, it was Principles of Microeconomics, which I know probably does not sound like the most inspiring of courses to most people in this room, but for me, it really was. For one simple thing that our professor said to us early on in the course. He said, the most powerful resources we have as a species are our ideas. Most powerful tools we have are all up here. And when what's in our minds is made tangible, there's always an opportunity for revolution. Human history, of course, is full of all of these revolutions. We have a pattern. The human race pushes ideas, pushes technologies, pushes itself almost to the edge, and then makes a wild, even brave turn towards something new, and almost always something better. I believe that right now we are at such a moment in our history, and it can be frightening standing here looking out over the cliff's edge at the period of changes that I'm going to be talking about here today. But as I pivot towards talking about the changes that I focus on professionally, I want you all to keep something in mind. Ideas can save the world. We know this, of course, because they always have. And despite everything that we see happening around us every single day, that is no different about ourselves than it has ever been throughout our history. Ideas can save the world. Remember that, because this can get very dark. Climate change, terrorism and violence, and world hunger. These problems are killing us. And there is no one here to save us except ourselves. In my arena, at least, these represent the greatest challenges of the 21st century. Greenhouse gas emissions are going through the roof, leading to things like climate variability, temperature change, we see on this graph right here, and natural disasters happening around the world. And these changes are, in fact, disrupting the very foundations of our global economy, in fact, eroding it. Alongside of this, we're starting to see incredible instability occurring in some of the world's most vulnerable countries. Starting in roughly the 1970s, we saw a slow and then, in fact, very sudden increase in the total number of terrorist attacks happening around the world. Our best guesses, by the way, as to the source of this change that we see right here, always come back to instability. Now, on the hunger front, we see a somewhat more hopeful story. In just about 25 years, the total number of people going hungry worldwide dropped from over 1 billion in the early 1990s down to under 800 million by the mid-2010s. Now, the problem is, you can see here in the end of the graph, we're now potentially experiencing the beginnings of another spike. And rapid population growth rates globally are making it even harder for us to combat the problem. With 7.5 billion people alive today, and about 10 billion projected to be living by the end of the century, we are now expected to have to grow more food in the next 50 years than we have in the last 10,000 years of our history combined. All while our total arable land space is decreasing in part due to climate change. So where's the hope? The first thing I can tell you in the hope arena is that these problems are interrelated. And while that may sound strange, to me at least, that interrelationship is itself a sign of hope. See, our global food system, it sits at the nexus of dozens of different challenges happening around the world. And this makes sense, of course, intuitively, because even if you're not there already, food is one of 3 primary inputs for literally everything that we do. If you have not caught on, the other 2 are air and water. Yeah, food, air, and water. Without these 3 things, our society as we know it would not be possible. Now, it's the relationship of food and water that I want us to concentrate on here. It's particularly important because, unfortunately, our global food systems have what can be called a resiliency problem. And that problem is due mostly to its use of water. It's a terrible irony that some of the world's most important agricultural centers also happen to be some of the most water-stressed places on our planet. And these problems are coming from various sources. They come from things like pollution, poor sanitation, poor treatment, and in fact, poor and underdeveloped technologies and practices in agriculture. But another major contributor that we all have to contend with is drought. In the US, we see this in the state of California. We all know it's a pretty drought-prone state, right? It also happens to be the world's 9th largest agricultural economy. It produces about 90% of the world's almonds, and that's a pretty specific thing to say, but we'll get to why. Okay, 90% of the world's almonds. It also happens to produce about 10% of all the beef that's consumed in the United States alone. Both of these products, both of these foods, almonds and beef, take an incredible amount of water to produce. In the case of almonds, we're talking about roughly 1.1 gallons of water per almond. And maybe that does not sound immediately so significant, but for a product that's essentially the size of your thumbprint, gallon's not exactly minuscule. Other crops that are growing in California, things like broccoli, walnuts, lettuce, asparagus, these all take even more water to produce than the almond. But beef's our real water hog. It takes about 2,000 gallons of water just to produce a single pound of beef. And remember, again, California is a drought-prone state. 80% of human water usage in the state of California comes from agriculture alone. And when we're factoring in environmental uses of water in California, things literally like evaporation, like actually wild plants and animals consuming water, agriculture still accounts for 50% of all the water consumption in the state of California. At the same time, agriculture and other land use accounts for roughly a quarter of our emissions globally. So greenhouse gas emissions, lots and lots of these are coming from agriculture. It's an untenable crisis because it means that agriculture is driving problems related to climate from both the front and the back end simultaneously. Again, it is an untenable crisis that we will have to pay for one day if we don't do something soon. But luckily enough for us here in the United States, our relative stability is a shield against greater problems. When these kinds of crises occur elsewhere, the results can be catastrophic. Let me tell you a story about Syria. See, globally, we've had an inkling that climate change was making droughts more likely. But Syria just so happens to be the first place this connection was shown quantifiably. During the years leading up to their civil war, Syria and, in fact, the greater Middle East were undergoing a rather severe drought that would eventually be a driving factor behind the protests of the Arab Spring. An early rally cry of these protests, by the way, was bread, freedom, and social justice, in that order. The connections to food were laid bare in the streets from the very beginning. And through research that's been published by scholars at Columbia University, we now know that climate variability associated with the effects of man-made climate change made drought in Syria 2 to 3 times more likely, and in fact, more severe. See, agriculture is based on our ability to plan. We plant crops during particular seasons, expecting particular conditions that will allow them to grow and to thrive. When that starts to fall apart, the whole system can fall apart along with it. Drought in non-resilient agricultural communities is quite literally a death sentence. And not only for the crops themselves, but actually for the people that grow them. In the case of Syria, their drought forced millions of people to flee their failing croplands and go into the cities. At the same time, the terrorist organization that we now know as ISIS was forcing millions more to flee Iraq and come into Syrian cities at the same time. Some 6,000 people are fleeing Syria every single day. The system there has fallen apart. See, the introduction of millions of new people, quite frankly, especially unemployed young men, into an urban environment is a recipe for instability. And instability, as we all now know, is a terrorist organization's bread and butter. Simply put, we do not see these kinds of organizations flourishing like this in stable environments. While the capacity or the motivations might be there, those things which allow them to grow and to cause damage on that scale is vastly diminished simply by a stable environment. Again, 6,000 people are fleeing Syria every single day, but it doesn't end there. The conflict itself has actually deepened the damages done to the food system. As we speak, there are about 9 million people in Syria in need of food-based assistance specifically. And unfortunately, it doesn't even end there. Syria is not an isolated incident. We see food-based conflicts happening throughout the world. Prime examples of these are happening in Africa. Okay, some of the world's most severe droughts are causing some of its most severe famines and leading to some of its most brutal conflicts. We have data from Nigeria that shows that violent deaths and conflict events are actually rising in conjunction with the price of food. As the price of food goes up, more people get killed. In Somalia, where about 70% of the citizens are using some form of subsistence agriculture to get their basic needs taken care of, we've got another situation of severe and prolonged drought leading to severe famine. And it should be no surprise to us then that in 2016, Somalia's resident ISIS affiliate, the organization known as Al-Shabaab, was named the most deadly terrorist organization in the world. These things are happening in Somalia. They're happening in Nigeria. They're happening in Syria. They're also happening in places like South Sudan and Yemen. The people in these places are food stressed. They are water stressed, and they are under daily threat of violence. But it still does not end there. I'm here to tell you that unfortunately these things, or versions of these things, are happening here at home. Through research at Clemson University, we now know that a 1% increase in food insecurity at the US county level results in a 12% increase in violent crime at the same level. This, by the way, is true even when we're holding other predicting factors of those crimes at a constant. Food insecurity causes the change, and the change itself is a quantifiable effect of more violence. So can we come back to hope? Yeah? Ready for that? Okay. I'll start here. We have the technology to solve these problems right now. These problems, though they're vast, though they're complex, though they're intimidating, are in fact able to be combated using ideas and technologies which have already been developed, and I can prove that to you. I'm a co-founder of a little organization called Urbavore. For the past 2 years, my team and I, we've been developing a technology that we call the U-Bloom. It's a hydroponic garden. It's capable of growing roughly 30 pounds of produce per month in just a little bit over 1 square foot of floor space. It uses no soil, and it uses, at a minimum, 90% less water than traditional agriculture. It does all of this while taking up the same amount of energy as one single 90-watt light bulb. Now, these products are still under development. My team and I, we are already pursuing projects and partnerships that are going to take them into some of the most food insecure communities in the United States and, in fact, in the Middle East. Our idea was simple. Let's build a technology that will cut back on the emissions from agriculture while making the task of growing food easier, cheaper, and more efficient. Our systems are sustainable. They're low cost. They take only minimal time, effort, and resources to use. As I see it, this idea, it's a key towards resiliency. It's one that can nourish our bodies, one that can protect our planet, and one that can make communities not only healthier, but safer in the long run. I'll repeat it. We have the technologies to solve these problems. It's only a matter of effort and commitment. Seeing the interconnections of the world's greatest crises should not paralyze us to action. Rather, it should embolden us towards seeing things through. The payoffs are immeasurable. The possibilities are endless. And for me, well, it all centers around the dinner table. It's a place where we share laughter, a place where we share meaning and culture and community and love. It also happens to be a place where some of the world's most important problems can be addressed. All we have left to do, ladies and gentlemen, is work towards making our ideas a reality. They're our most powerful resources, and with them, I promise you, we can save the world. Thank you.